She stood on that platform, heart hammering, knowing the man who answered her letter could take one look and send her right back east. 28 years old, carrying a body the world called shameful, Clara Bennett had crossed half a continent on nothing but desperate hope. The telegram in her pocket promised a rancher seeking a wife who could endure hardship. She'd written him the brutal truth about herself, the sighs, the stares, the lifetime of rejection. Now, as dust devils swirled around her boots and passengers whispered behind gloved hands, she waited for the inevitable disgust in his eyes. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey reaches. The train's wheels screeched against iron rails, and Clara Bennett pressed her forehead against the soot-stained window, watching Wyoming unfold in shades of amber and rust. Every mile westward felt like peeling away a layer of old skin, painful, necessary, impossible to stop. Her trunk sat beside her on the worn velvet seat, containing everything she owned: 3 plain dresses sewn with extra fabric panels, a mother-of-pearl hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother, 17 books she'd read until the spines cracked, and at the very bottom, wrapped in muslin, a daguerreotype of her younger sister Eleanor's wedding day. Clara had burned every other photograph of herself. In the one she'd kept, she stood at the edge of the frame, half turned away from the camera, her face carefully angled to minimize the fullness of her cheeks. Her mother had insisted she wear a corset 2 sizes too small. The pain had been excruciating, but not as excruciating as overhearing her aunt whisper to the seamstress, "Poor thing, all that fabric wasted on a figure like that." That had been 3 years ago, in Boston, in a world that measured a woman's worth in inches around her waist. The conductor passed through the car, his eyes sliding over Clara with practiced indifference. The same look she'd received her entire life. Not quite disgust, not quite pity, just a swift assessment followed by immediate dismissal. Not worth noticing, not worth remembering. Too much body, not enough beauty. She'd learned to make herself invisible in crowds, to speak softly, to take up as little space as possible despite the reality of her physical presence. At parties, she lingered near walls. At church socials, she served punch rather than dancing. At family dinners, she ate sparingly while her mother watched every bite with hawk-like precision. "Really, Clara," her mother would say, voice sharp as cut glass, "is that second helping necessary?" It was never about hunger. It had never been about hunger. Her body had betrayed her at 13, developing curves and softness, while other girls remained willowy and acceptable. By 16, she'd tried every reduction diet published in ladies' magazines. The vinegar cure, the all-protein regimen, the water fast that left her dizzy and desperate. Her weight would drop, then return with interest, as if her body was punishing her for the deprivation. At 21, she'd overheard her father speaking to a potential suitor in his study. "She has other qualities," her father had said, voice heavy with apology. "She's well-read, excellent at household management, a kind disposition." The young man, a merchant's son with thinning hair and a weak chin, had declined anyway. Too politely. "I'm sure she'll make someone very happy," he'd said, which was code for, "But not me, never me, not someone like her." The train lurched around a bend, and Clara's reflection wavered in the window glass. Brown hair pulled severely back, gray eyes that had learned not to expect kindness, a face that might have been called handsome if it weren't attached to a body the world found offensive. She was 32 pounds heavier than the ideal weight prescribed by medical journals. She knew this because her mother weighed her monthly, recording the numbers in a leather-bound ledger kept locked in a desk drawer, as if Clara's body was a failing business venture requiring constant monitoring. Last year, Eleanor had married Thomas Whitmore, a young attorney from a good family with political aspirations. The wedding had been a spring spectacle: white roses, champagne, 200 guests in their finest silks and tailored suits. Clara had been a bridesmaid, forced into a dress the color of pale mint that made her skin look sallow and her body look even larger by comparison. She'd stood at the altar, hands clasped around a bouquet of lilies, while Eleanor glowed beside her groom. At the reception, Clara had watched couples waltz across the polished floor. Not a single man asked her to dance. Not one. She'd left early, claiming a headache, and walked home alone through lamplit streets, her footsteps echoing against cobblestones like accusations. That night, sitting in her bedroom with the door locked, she'd made a decision. She would not spend the rest of her life apologizing for existing. The advertisement had appeared in the Boston Herald 3 weeks later, tucked between notices for patent medicines and farm equipment. Wyoming rancher seeks wife. Must be of sound character, strong constitution, and willing to endure frontier hardship. No frailty, no pretense. Write to Samuel Carter, Red Hollow, Wyoming Territory. Clara had read it 17 times before finding the courage to respond. Her letter had been brutally honest, more honest than she'd ever been with anyone except herself. She'd described her appearance without euphemism, her size without apology, her fear of rejection without embellishment. She'd told him about the whispers, the pitying looks, the lifetime of being invisible despite taking up so much space. I understand if this disqualifies me, she'd written. I'm accustomed to disappointment, but I thought you should know the truth before wasting postage on further correspondence. She'd expected silence. Instead, Samuel Carter's reply had arrived within 2 weeks, written in firm, clear handwriting. Miss Bennett, I appreciate your honesty. I've spent 10 years on this ranch learning that beauty fades faster than summer grass, and that strength comes in forms the world doesn't always recognize. My first wife was considered a great beauty. She left after 8 months because she couldn't tolerate the isolation, the wind, or the work. I'm not looking for ornamental, I'm looking for real. If you can endure Wyoming winters, mend fence wire, and speak your mind without apology, then come. If not, I wish you well, wherever you land. Samuel Carter. No poetry. No romance, no false promises, just honesty meeting honesty across 2,000 miles. They'd exchanged 4 more letters. Clara had told him about her love of reading, her competence with numbers, her complete ignorance of ranch work, but willingness to learn. Samuel had told her about his cattle operation, the brutal weather, the loneliness that settled into a man's bones after too many silent winters. In his final letter, he'd enclosed a train ticket and a simple instruction: come if you're coming, don't if you're not. Either way, no regrets. Clara's mother had been horrified. You'll be ruined, she'd hissed, pacing the parlor with her hands twisted into white-knuckled fists. Married to some crude frontiersman in the wilderness. What will people say? I don't care what people say, Clara had replied quietly. I've never cared. That's the problem, isn't it? I exist in a body you find embarrassing, and no amount of dieting or corsets or hiding will fix that. Her mother's face had crumpled, not with sadness, but with frustration. I only wanted what was best for you. No, Clara had said, her voice steady for the first time in years. You wanted me to disappear, to become small enough to be acceptable. But I can't, I won't, not anymore. Her father had been kinder, pressing a small purse of money into her hands before she left. Be safe, he'd whispered. Write when you can. Eleanor had said nothing. They'd stood in the foyer of their childhood home, years of unspoken resentment hanging between them like fog. Finally, Eleanor had stepped forward and embraced her, briefly, carefully. I hope you find what you're looking for, she'd said. Clara had nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She wasn't looking for happiness. She was looking for a place where her body didn't have to be a constant apology. Now, as the train slowed into Red Hollow, Wyoming Territory, Clara gathered her courage like kindling for a fire. The platform was weathered wood and dust, surrounded by buildings that looked temporary, as if the wind might blow them away at any moment. A handful of people waited on the platform. Ranch hands in worn denim, a woman in calico holding a child's hand, an older man loading crates onto a wagon, and one man standing alone, hat in hand, scanning the arriving passengers with careful attention. Samuel Carter. Clara recognized him from his description. Tall, lean, weathered by sun and work. Probably 40. Dark hair showing gray at the temples. A face that had forgotten how to smile, but hadn't yet learned cruelty. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady from days of travel and terror. This was the moment. This was where he would see her, really see her, and realize his mistake. She'd prepared herself for it, rehearsed what she would say. I understand. Thank you for the ticket. I'll find my own way back. The conductor helped her down the steps, his hand impersonal under her elbow. Her boots touched Wyoming dust, and the wind immediately tugged at her skirt, her hair, her carefully constructed composure. Samuel Carter stepped forward. His eyes found her face, traveled down her body. Not quickly, not with the practiced dismissal she was used to, but with genuine assessment, taking her measure the way a rancher might evaluate livestock. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. Let him look. Let him see exactly what he'd agreed to. She was large. She knew this. Her dress pulled tight across her bosom and hips despite being cut generously. Her face was round, her arms soft, her body unapologetically present in a way the world found offensive. Samuel Carter looked at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, the roughness of his hands, the way his shoulders carried years of solitary burden. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for her to hear over the wind. "You're beautiful." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Not pity, not politeness, not the careful lie people told to spare feelings. Just a simple statement, delivered with the same straightforward honesty as everything else he'd written. Something inside her chest cracked open, something that had been locked tight since childhood, protecting itself from hope. She started, but her voice broke. Samuel's expression didn't change. He wasn't embarrassed by her emotion, wasn't trying to fix it or dismiss it. He simply waited. "I'm not," Clara managed finally. "I've never been." "Then people weren't looking properly," Samuel said. He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Come on. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. We can talk on the way, or not. Your choice." He walked toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, leaving Clara standing on the platform with tears she refused to let fall. A rancher's wife passing by with her children glanced at Clara, then leaned toward her husband. The whisper carried on the wind. Larger than expected. 6 months ago, Clara would have shrunk from those words, would have tried to make herself smaller, quieter, less present. Instead, she squared her shoulders, lifted her skirt to keep it out of the dust, and walked toward Samuel Carter's wagon with her head high. She had crossed half a continent. She had left behind everything familiar. She had chosen this, chosen herself, for the first time in her life. Whatever happened next, she would not apologize for it. Samuel helped her onto the wagon seat, his hand steady under her elbow, and climbed up beside her. The horses started forward without needing instruction, familiar with the route home. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. The landscape stretched out in every direction, vast, empty, beautiful in its harshness. No buildings to crowd against, no neighbors to whisper behind gloved hands, just wind and grass and sky so wide it made Clara's chest ache. "It's honest country," Samuel said finally. "Doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is. I figured you might appreciate that." Clara looked at him, really looked at him. His profile was weathered, his hands scarred from work, his clothes practical rather than fashionable. He sat comfortably with silence, didn't fill the air with nervous chatter. "Why did you choose my letter?" she asked. "You must have received others." "I did. 17, to be exact." Samuel kept his eyes on the road. 16 of them lied, painted pretty pictures of themselves, promised things they couldn't deliver. Yours was the only one that told the truth. The truth isn't flattering. The truth doesn't have to be. He glanced at her briefly. "I've had flattering. My first wife was beautiful by every measure the world uses. Turned heads everywhere she went. Men stumbled over themselves to fetch her lemonade at socials." "What happened?" "She hated it here. Hated the isolation, the work, the dirt under her fingernails. Hated me for bringing her somewhere that didn't appreciate her beauty." His voice held no bitterness, just tired acceptance. "She left after less than a year. Went back to St. Louis and married a banker within 6 months. I'm sorry. Don't be. I learned something valuable. Beauty's just geography. It exists in the eye seeing it, not in the thing being seen. And out here, what matters is what you can endure, what you can build, whether you can stand up when winter tries to knock you down." Clara studied the horizon. "I don't know anything about ranching. You'll learn, or you won't. Either way, that's not why I asked you here." "Then why?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like a man handling something fragile. Because your letter didn't ask me to save you. Didn't ask me to fix you or complete you or any of that romantic nonsense. You just asked for a chance to start over somewhere that might measure you different. And you think Wyoming will? I think Wyoming doesn't care. The land, the weather, the work, none of it cares what you look like. It only cares if you show up. He met her eyes directly. And I care about having a partner who shows up, who speaks truth, who won't run when things get hard. I won't run, Clara said quietly. I believe you. The wagon rattled over rough ground and Clara gripped the seat to steady herself. The motion was unfamiliar, uncomfortable. Everything here would be unfamiliar, everything would be uncomfortable. But for the first time in her life, the discomfort felt like possibility rather than punishment. We'll marry tomorrow, Samuel said matter-of-factly. There's a minister in town. Decent man, doesn't ask too many questions. After that, the ranch is as much yours as mine. Equal partners. I won't make decisions without you, and I expect the same courtesy. Equal partners, Clara repeated, testing the words. I've run this place alone for 5 years. I'm tired of making every choice by myself, tired of eating meals in silence, tired of winters where I don't speak to another human for weeks at a time. But I don't need a decoration. I need someone with a spine. Clara almost smiled. I have a spine. I know, I could tell from your handwriting. That surprised her. My handwriting. Firm, no flourishes, you wrote like someone who says what they mean. He paused. Plus, you used real ink instead of that watered-down nonsense. Shows you don't mind spending resources on quality. They rode in comfortable silence after that, the landscape gradually shifting from flat plains to rolling hills dotted with cattle. In the distance, Clara could see mountains, real mountains, jagged and snow-capped even in late spring. That's the ranch, Samuel said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley. Main house, barn, 2 outbuildings. Creek runs year-round just past that ridge. 300 head of cattle, give or take. Neighbors are 10 miles east, 12 miles west. Town is 2 hours by wagon, less on horseback if you ride hard. It looks small against the vastness of the land. Vulnerable. Like something that existed only because someone willed it to. It's beautiful, Clara said, and meant it. Samuel looked at her with something like surprise. Most people find it lonely. I've been lonely in rooms full of people, Clara said. At least here, the loneliness is honest. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. The wagon rolled into the ranch yard, chickens scattering before the wheels. A dog, some mix of cattle breed and determination, bounded over, tail wagging. That's Hank, Samuel said. He's friendlier than he is useful, but I keep him around anyway. Clara climbed down from the wagon before Samuel could help her, her legs stiff from the journey. Hank immediately pressed against her skirt, sniffing thoroughly. The main house was simple, weathered wood, a covered porch, windows that needed washing, real, unpretentious. The kind of place that didn't care about appearances because it was too busy surviving. I'll show you around, Samuel said, lifting her trunk. You'll take the east bedroom. I'm in the west. There's a common room between, kitchen at the back. Outhouse is behind the barn. I'll build an indoor water closet come summer if you want one. He said it casually, but Clara understood the significance. Separate bedrooms. Privacy. No assumptions. That's not necessary, she started, but Samuel cut her off. It's necessary, he said firmly. We're strangers, Clara. Legally married tomorrow, but still strangers. That means respect, patience, time. He looked at her directly. I won't touch you until you ask me to. And if you never ask, that's your right. Clara's throat tightened. In Boston, marriage was assumed to include certain obligations. A wife's duty, a husband's rights. Thank you, she whispered. Samuel nodded and carried her trunk inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and coffee, overlaid with the faint scent of dust and leather. The furniture was simple but sturdy, a table with 4 chairs, a worn sofa facing a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books. Books. Clara moved closer, reading the spines. Agricultural manuals, yes, but also novels, Dickens, Twain, even some poetry, a complete works of Shakespeare, spine cracked from use. You read, she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Winter gets long. Reading helps. Samuel set her trunk down in the east bedroom. You're welcome to any of them. Add your own to the shelves if you brought any. I brought 17. He smiled, just barely, but it counted. Good, I'll have new material. The bedroom was small but clean. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a simple dresser, a wash basin on a stand. A window looked out over the valley, showing the last of the sunset painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Clara stood at that window, listening to Samuel move around in the kitchen, hearing the clatter of pans and the strike of a match. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger. Tomorrow she would become Clara Carter. Tomorrow she would begin a life where her body, this body she'd spent 3 decades apologizing for, would be measured by what it could do rather than how it looked. She unpacked her trunk methodically, hanging her 3 dresses in the small wardrobe, placing her books on the windowsill, unwrapping the daguerreotype of Eleanor's wedding and propping it on the dresser. At the bottom of the trunk, she found the dress she'd planned to wear for the ceremony, gray wool, practical, deliberately plain. But underneath it, wrapped in tissue paper, was something else. Her grandmother's shawl, deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread, beautiful and impractical and completely unsuited to frontier life. Clara had packed it on impulse, thinking she might need one piece of beauty to remember who she'd been. Now, touching the soft fabric, she realized she didn't need to remember. She needed to forget. She needed to become someone new, someone who took up space without apology, someone who existed without shame. "Supper's ready," Samuel called from the kitchen. "Nothing fancy? Beans and cornbread?" Clara folded the shawl carefully and placed it back in the trunk. Tomorrow she would marry Samuel Carter. But tonight she would eat beans and cornbread with a man who had looked at her body, this body the world called shameful, and called her beautiful. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Bennett believed she might actually survive this life. She might even learn to live it. The beans were simple but warm, and Clara ate slowly, aware of Samuel's presence across the table in a way that felt strange without being threatening. He didn't watch her eat, didn't monitor her portions, didn't make small talk to fill the silence. When she reached for a second piece of cornbread, her hand hesitated, years of conditioning making her pause, calculate, measure the judgment that might follow. Samuel pushed the plate closer to her without looking up. "Made plenty," he said simply. Clara took the cornbread. They washed dishes side by side afterward, falling into an easy rhythm despite being strangers. Samuel washed, Clara dried, and Hank sat hopefully nearby in case anything edible fell to the floor. "We'll leave at 8 tomorrow," Samuel said, scrubbing a cast-iron skillet with practiced efficiency. "Minister likes to get ceremonies done before the heat sets in. Whole thing takes maybe 10 minutes. "No guess?" Clara asked. "Didn't figure you'd want them. Was I wrong?" She thought of Boston weddings, Eleanor's elaborate affair with hundreds of eyes tracking every movement, every bite, every moment where Clara had stood visible and wrong. "No," she said quietly. "You weren't wrong." Samuel nodded. "After the ceremony, I thought we'd stop by the general store. You'll need practical clothes for ranch work, boots that won't fall apart in mud, maybe a hat that actually keeps the sun off." Clara looked down at her gray traveling dress, already dusty from a single wagon ride. Everything she owned had been chosen for invisibility, for taking up as little visual space as possible despite the reality of her body. "I don't have much money," she admitted. "Didn't ask if you did. The ranch account covers what we need." He rinsed the skillet and set it aside to dry. "We're partners, Clara. That means what's mine is yours. The cattle, the land, the debts, the profits. All of it. Partners." He kept using that word like it meant something beyond legal paperwork. "I've never been anyone's partner before," Clara said, surprising herself with the honesty. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his hands still in the wash water. "Neither have I. Not really. My first marriage was traditional. I made decisions, she followed them, or didn't, usually." He pulled the plug, letting the gray water drain. "Didn't work out well for either of us." "What will partnership look like?" "Don't know yet. Figure we'll work it out as we go." He dried his hands on a towel. "But I expect you to speak up when you disagree with me, and I'll do the same. No silent resentment festering, no games, just honest conversation between two people trying to build something that lasts." Clara folded the damp dish towel, smoothing out the wrinkles with careful precision. I'm not used to people wanting to hear my opinions. Then you've been around the wrong people. He said it so matter-of-factly, as if her entire life experience up until this moment had simply been a matter of poor geography rather than fundamental inadequacy. They moved to the common room where Samuel built up the fire against the evening chill. Clara sat on the sofa, hands folded in her lap, watching him work. His movements were efficient, economical, born from years of doing everything alone. You can ask, Samuel said without turning around, whatever questions you're sitting on. I can see you thinking. Clara took a breath. Why didn't you remarry sooner? It's been 5 years. Didn't see the point of repeating a mistake. He straightened, brushing bark off his hands. Thought maybe I wasn't suited for marriage, that some men are meant to be alone. He settled into a chair across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered face. Then last winter hit particularly hard. Lost some cattle to a freak storm. Spent 2 weeks snowed in with nothing but my own thoughts. Realized I wasn't afraid of marriage failing again. I was afraid of dying out here without ever trying again. That's when you placed the advertisement? That's when I admitted I wanted a life, not just survival. He looked at her directly. What about you? What made you answer? Clara could have lied, could have painted a romantic picture of seeking adventure or new horizons. But Samuel had been honest with her. She owed him the same courtesy. I was disappearing, she said quietly. Not literally, but watching my sister marry, watching my parents give up on me ever being acceptable, watching every social gathering confirm that I was the problem everyone was too polite to acknowledge. She paused, gathering courage. I realized I could spend the rest of my life trying to become someone the world might approve of, or I could go somewhere that might not care. And you thought Wyoming might not care? I thought anywhere had to be better than Boston. Samuel nodded slowly. Fair enough. Though I should warn you, small towns gossip same as cities. Probably worse, since there's less to talk about. I expected that. But out here, gossip doesn't have the same power. People talk, sure. But when winter comes and everyone's fighting to survive, nobody cares what you look like. They care if you'll help haul water when the creek freezes, if you'll share food when supplies run short, if you'll show up when a neighbor's barn catches fire. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression serious. I won't lie and say appearance doesn't matter to anyone. Some folks will talk, some will judge. Mrs. Winters at the general store has opinions about everything and everyone, and she'll share them whether you ask or not. He paused. But the people worth knowing won't care, and the ones who do care aren't worth knowing. Easy to say, Clara murmured. True to live. Samuel stood, adding another log to the fire. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day, and the next morning we start real work. I'll need you up at dawn. Clara rose, suddenly exhausted by travel and emotion and the strange weight of hope she wasn't quite ready to trust. Samuel, she said as he turned toward his bedroom. He looked back. Thank you for being honest. Nothing to thank me for. Honesty's just the baseline. The real test comes when we disagree about something that matters. He disappeared into his room, and Clara stood alone in the firelight, listening to the wind test the windows and Hank snoring from his place by the hearth. She moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines until she found a volume of Whitman's poetry. Carried it to her bedroom, where lamplight threw soft shadows against walls that would become familiar. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger who called her beautiful. Tomorrow she would become someone new. But tonight, she read poetry and let herself imagine, just briefly, that this might actually work. The morning broke cold and clear, sunrise painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink that made Clara's chest ache with something she couldn't quite name. She dressed carefully in her gray wool dress, pinned her hair back with her grandmother's silver combs, and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. Same face, same body, same woman who had boarded a train in Boston carrying a lifetime of shame. But something in her eyes looked different. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile, too easily broken. Determination, maybe. Or just the grim resolve of someone who had run out of alternatives and decided to stand her ground. Samuel was already in the kitchen when she emerged, coffee brewing and eggs frying in a cast-iron skillet. He'd cleaned up, shaved, changed into a pressed shirt that looked uncomfortable on his rancher's frame, combed his hair back with water that was already drying in the warm kitchen. "Morning," he said, glancing at her briefly. "Coffee's ready?" Clara poured herself a cup, the bitter warmth settling in her stomach alongside nervousness. "Are you nervous? About the ceremony?" Samuel flipped the eggs with practiced efficiency. "No. Already been married once. Know what the words mean." He slid eggs onto 2 plates, added toast, set them on the table. "Nervous about what comes after, maybe. Making sure I keep my promises." They ate quickly, and Clara found herself grateful for Samuel's practical approach. No romantic pretense. No attempts to make this into something it wasn't. Just 2 people entering a legal contract with clear expectations and honest intentions. The ride into town took 90 minutes, the wagon rattling over rough roads while morning sun climbed higher. Samuel pointed out landmarks, a creek that ran dry in summer, a stand of cottonwoods that marked a neighboring property line, the spot where he'd once seen a mountain lion at dusk. Clara listened, absorbing information about a landscape that would become her whole world. Red Hollow's main street consisted of perhaps 15 buildings, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a hotel that had seen better days, and a small white chapel at the far end. A few people moved about their morning business, pausing to watch as Samuel's wagon passed. Clara felt their eyes like brands. "That's the Hendersons," Samuel said, nodding toward a couple standing outside the general store. "Run the cattle operation east of mine. Good people. That's Jim Corrigan at the blacksmith. Does excellent work if you don't mind waiting 3 weeks for it. And that—" He gestured toward a stout woman in a purple dress watching them with undisguised curiosity. "Is Mrs. Winters. Owns the general store and most of the town gossip. Should I worry?" "Only if you care what she thinks." Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop outside the chapel, "Which I don't recommend." The minister was a lean man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly. Age or illness, Clara couldn't tell. He greeted Samuel warmly, then turned to Clara with gentle courtesy. "Miss Bennett, I presume? I'm Reverend Thomas. Samuel told me you'd traveled from Boston. That's quite a journey." "It seemed necessary," Clara said. The Reverend smiled. "The best changes usually do." He gestured toward the chapel door. "Shall we? I have another appointment at 11. The ceremony was exactly as Samuel had promised. Brief, practical, devoid of romance or spectacle. Clara and Samuel stood before the simple altar, repeated vows that were centuries old, signed a register that made everything legal. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them married, Samuel didn't kiss her. Just nodded, as if they'd completed a satisfactory business transaction, and shook the Reverend's hand. "Thank you," Samuel said, pressing payment into the minister's palm. More than the standard fee, Clara noticed. "Bless you both," Reverend Thomas said warmly. "Marriage is a partnership in all weather. May you weather it well together." Outside, the sun had climbed higher, and heat was beginning to settle over the town. Clara climbed back onto the wagon seat, Mrs. Clara Carter now, legally and permanently, and felt the weight of the change like a physical thing. "You all right?" Samuel asked. "I don't know yet." "Fair answer." He guided the horses toward the general store. "Let's get you some clothes that won't fall apart the first time you mend a fence." The general store was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to farming equipment. Mrs. Winters stood behind the counter like a sentry, her sharp eyes tracking their entrance. "Samuel Carter," she said, her voice carrying false sweetness. "And this must be the male bride we've all heard about." Clara felt the assessment in those words. Male bride, like a commodity ordered from a catalog. She lifted her chin, meeting Mrs. Winters' gaze directly. "Clara Carter," she said firmly. "We were just married." "How lovely." Mrs. Winters' smile didn't reach her eyes. "And so quickly. You must be very practical." Samuel stepped forward, his presence suddenly filling the space in a way that made Mrs. Winters step back slightly. "My wife needs work clothes," he said flatly. "Sturdy boots, denim, cotton shirts. Whatever she picks out, put it on my account." "Of course," Mrs. Winters gestured toward the back of the store. "We have some items that might fit." The word hung in the air like an insult. Clara moved past her, refusing to acknowledge the barb. In the back corner, she found practical clothing, Men's work shirts in larger sizes, denim trousers, heavy canvas jackets. She selected items methodically, ignoring Mrs. Winter's hovering presence. "Those are men's trousers," Mrs. Winter said, her voice dripping with scandalized concern. "They'll work," Clara replied without looking up. "Surely you'd prefer something more feminine?" Clara turned, holding a pair of denim work pants against her waist. They would fit. They would last. They would allow her to move freely without worrying about torn skirts or muddy hems. "I prefer practical," she said evenly. Mrs. Winters sniffed. "Well, I suppose frontier life requires certain compromises." Samuel appeared beside Clara, his arms full of additional items: thick socks, leather gloves, a wide-brimmed hat. "These too," he told Mrs. Winters. "And be civil, or we'll take our business to Henderson's next time we need supplies." Mrs. Winters' expression soured, but she began tallying items without further comment. Outside, loading packages into the wagon, Samuel glanced at Clara. "You handled that well." "I've had practice." Clara arranged a box of supplies in the wagon bed, though usually I just tried to be invisible. Hard to be invisible when someone's determined to see you. "Is it always like that here?" Samuel shook his head. "Mrs. Winters is the worst of it. Most people are too busy surviving to care about gossip." He paused, considering. "Though I won't lie, there'll be talk. New wife, different from what folks expected. Some will have opinions. And we ignore them." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "We live our lives, run our ranch, and let everyone else worry about their own business." The ride home felt different, as if crossing that chapel threshold had fundamentally altered the landscape. The same road, the same sky, but Clara was returning to the ranch as someone new. Someone legally bound to this land and this man. Someone who had chosen to stop disappearing. They spent the afternoon in practical tasks. Samuel showed Clara the barn, the chicken coop, the storage buildings, explained the ranch's routine: cattle needed checking morning and evening, fences needed constant repair, water sources had to be monitored. "We're heading into summer," he said, standing at the edge of a pasture where cattle grazed in late afternoon sun. "Easier season. You'll have time to learn before winter hits." "What's winter like?" "Hard." Samuel's expression grew distant. "Snow can trap you inside for weeks. Temperatures drop so low that water freezes before it hits the ground. Cattle need extra feed, pipes need insulation. Every trip outside requires layers of clothing." He looked at her. "It's the test, the real one. Summer's forgiving, winter isn't." Clara watched the cattle moving slowly across the grass, solid and real and completely indifferent to human concerns. "I won't run." "I know, you already said, but saying it and living it are different things." "Then I guess we'll see." Samuel nodded slowly. "I guess we will." That evening, they fell into a routine that would become familiar. Shared meals, shared silence, shared work cleaning up afterward. Samuel didn't try to fill quiet spaces with unnecessary conversation, and Clara found herself grateful for the reprieve from constant social performance. In Boston, silence had meant disapproval. Here, it simply meant comfort. 3 days into their marriage, Clara woke at dawn to find Samuel already gone, a note on the kitchen table. "Checking north fence, back by noon. Breakfast fixings in the pantry." She made coffee, fried eggs, ate alone at the table while Hank watched hopefully from his corner. Then she cleaned the kitchen, washed her face, changed into the work clothes she'd bought at the general store. The denim felt strange against her legs, liberating and scandalous in equal measure. The shirt was too large, the boots heavy and unfamiliar, but she could move, bend, work. She found Samuel 2 miles north, replacing rotted fence posts in the blazing sun. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face shadowed by his hat, his movements rhythmic and efficient. "Thought you might need help," Clara called. Samuel looked up, surprise flickering across his features before settling into something like approval. "You walked all the way out here?" "Wasn't that far." "In this heat?" Clara shrugged. "You do it every day." Samuel studied her for a moment, taking in the work clothes, the determination in her stance, the fact that she'd found him without directions. "All right," he said finally. "Hand me that wire there." They worked side by side through the morning, Samuel showing Clara how to string wire properly, how to tension it without breaking it, how to secure posts deep enough to withstand Wyoming wind. Her hands blistered, her back ached, sweat soaked through her shirt and dripped into her eyes. But Samuel didn't coddle her, didn't suggest she rest, didn't treat her like fragile ornamental decoration. He treated her like a partner. "You're stronger than you think," he said around mid-morning, watching her wrestle a post into position. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead. "I've never had reason to test it before." "Well, you've got reason now." They broke for lunch under the sparse shade of a cottonwood, sharing water from a canteen and the sandwiches Clara had packed that morning. The cattle grazed nearby, unconcerned with human labor. "My mother would be horrified," Clara said, looking down at her dusty, blistered hands. "She spent years trying to make me into a proper lady." "What's a proper lady?" "Small, quiet, ornamental, apologetic for existing." Clara flexed her fingers, feeling new calluses forming. "Definitely not someone who strings barbed wire in men's trousers." Samuel took a long drink of water. "Your mother sounds exhausting." Clara laughed, short and surprised. "She was. Is, I suppose. Still is back in Boston, probably wringing her hands over what the neighbors think about her daughter running off to marry a rancher." "You ever regret it? Running off or marrying you?" "Either. Both." Clara considered the question seriously, watching heat shimmer across the pasture. 3 days ago, she'd been Clara Bennett, a woman who had spent 3 decades apologizing for her body. Now she was Clara Carter, sitting in the dirt with blistered hands and aching muscles, married to a man who measured her worth in wire strung and work done. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." Samuel nodded, as if that settled something between them. That evening, Clara's whole body ached in ways she'd never experienced. Her hands were raw despite the gloves. Her shoulders burned, her legs trembled with exhaustion. She collapsed onto the sofa after dinner, too tired even to read. Samuel emerged from the kitchen with a basin of warm water and a clean towel. "Give me your hands." "What?" "Your hands. Let me see them." Reluctantly, Clara extended her blistered palms. Samuel knelt beside the sofa, dipping the towel in warm water and cleaning the dirt and blood from broken blisters with surprising gentleness. "This'll sting," he warned, producing a small tin of salve. It did sting, but Clara didn't pull away. She watched Samuel's weathered hands tend to hers, his touch careful, almost reverent. "You did good work today," he said quietly. "Better than some ranch hands I've hired." "I slowed you down." "You showed up. That's what matters." He wrapped her hands in clean cloth bandages. "These'll heal. Calluses will form. It gets easier." "Does it?" Samuel looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly. "The work gets easier. The rest—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "The rest gets different. Not easier, exactly. Just different." Clara understood. He was talking about marriage, about partnership, about two strangers learning to live as something more. "Different isn't bad," she said. "No," Samuel agreed. "Different isn't bad." He finished bandaging her hands and stood, taking the basin back to the kitchen. Clara sat alone on the sofa, her body exhausted, her hands throbbing, her heart doing something complicated and unfamiliar in her chest. This was partnership, not romance, not rescue, not transformation. Just two people showing up for each other, day after day, building something real from honest effort. A week into their marriage, Clara woke to the sound of rain drumming against the roof, the first rain since she'd arrived. She dressed quickly in her work clothes and found Samuel in the kitchen, coffee already brewing. "Creek will be running high," he said without preamble. "Good day to check the water sources, make sure nothing's clogged or damaged." They spent the morning riding the ranch's perimeter. Samuel on a sturdy bay gelding, Clara on a gentler mare he'd chosen specifically for her inexperience. The rain soaked through their oilskin jackets, turning the world gray and blurred. But Clara found she didn't mind. There was something honest about the rain, about weather that didn't care how you looked or who you'd been. It fell on everyone equally, beautiful or plain, thin or large, worthy or wanting. At the North Creek, they found a blockage, debris from the storm damming the water. Samuel dismounted, wading into the current without hesitation. Clara followed. Careful, Samuel called over the sound of rushing water. Current stronger than it looks. Together they cleared branches and rocks, their hands numb in the cold water, their clothes plastered to their bodies. It was hard, miserable work, and Clara had never felt more alive. When the water finally flowed free, Samuel looked at her across the creek. This woman in men's clothing with her hair plastered to her skull and mud streaking her face, and something shifted in his expression. Not desire exactly, recognition maybe, understanding. You really meant it, he said, about not running. Clara wiped rain from her face. I told you I did. People say lots of things. I'm not people. Samuel waded toward her, water swirling around his knees. When he reached her, he touched her cheek, briefly, carefully, asking permission with the gesture. Clara didn't pull away. No, Samuel said softly. You're not people. You're Clara Carter. And I'm starting to think I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming. He kissed her then, not passionately, but with intention, a promise made physical, an acknowledgement of something building between them. When he pulled back, Clara's heart was hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with cold water or hard work. We should head back, Samuel said, his voice rough, before the rain gets worse. They rode home in comfortable silence, and Clara understood that something fundamental had shifted between them. They were still learning each other, still strangers in many ways, but they were becoming something more, something real, something worth protecting. That night, as rain continued to drum against the roof and fire crackled in the hearth, Samuel sat beside Clara on the sofa, closer than before but still leaving space for choice. I know we agreed on separate bedrooms, he said carefully, and that still stands. But I wanted you to know I'm ready when you are. No pressure, no expectations, just whenever feels right. Clara looked at this man who had called her beautiful and meant it, who had bandaged her blistered hands, who had kissed her in a rain-swollen creek like she was something precious. Soon, she said quietly. Not tonight, but soon. Samuel nodded, accepting her timeline without argument. And Clara realized that this patience, this respect, this genuine partnership was what she'd been searching for without knowing it existed. Not rescue, not transformation, just real, honest connection between two imperfect people building something worth keeping. Summer deepened into long days of relentless heat and work that carved itself into Clara's muscles and bones. She learned to ride properly, to read weather patterns and cloud formations, to tell healthy cattle from sick ones by the way they moved. Her hands grew calloused, her skin bronzed despite the wide-brimmed hat, her body strong in ways that had nothing to do with Boston's measurements of acceptable femininity. 3 weeks after their wedding, Clara moved her belongings into Samuel's bedroom. Not because he asked, not because she felt obligated, because she wanted to. They came together that night with the same honesty that had defined everything else between them. No pretense, no performance, just two people learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Samuel touched her as if she was something valuable, and Clara discovered that desire had nothing to do with being small or ornamental. It had everything to do with being seen. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Samuel's steady breathing beside her, Clara felt something inside her chest unlock completely. A door she'd kept barred since childhood, protecting herself from hope that might turn to humiliation. You're crying, Samuel said quietly, his hand finding hers in the dark. I know. Did I hurt you? No. Clara turned toward him, letting tears fall freely. The opposite. You made me feel real. Samuel pulled her closer, his arms solid around her shoulders. You've always been real, Clara. The world just needed better eyes. She fell asleep like that, held and safe, and woke to morning sun streaming through windows she'd helped Samuel wash 2 days prior. Her body ached in new ways, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that came from being fully present in her own skin. Samuel was already up. She could hear him in the kitchen, smell coffee brewing and bacon frying. Clara dressed quickly and joined him, feeling suddenly shy in a way she hadn't before. He looked up from the stove, his eyes warm. Morning? Morning. Sleep well? Better than I have in years. Samuel smiled, a real smile, not just the slight upturn of lips, but something that reached his eyes and made him look younger. Good, because we've got cattle to move today. Henderson lost part of his fence in last week's storm, and some of his herd wandered onto our property. We need to get them back before he has to come looking. Clara poured coffee, grateful for the easy return to practical matters. This was how they worked: moments of intimacy followed by shared labor, emotional vulnerability balanced by tangible tasks. It was steady, real, nothing like the dramatic romance novels her sister had favored. It was better. They spent the morning on horseback, rounding up Henderson's wayward cattle and driving them east toward the property line. The work was hot and dusty, requiring patience and persistence as cattle proved far more stubborn than Clara had anticipated. "They're like toddlers," she called to Samuel, frustrated as a young heifer bolted away from the group for the third time. Samuel laughed, an actual laugh, rich and genuine. Exactly like toddlers, stubborn, unpredictable, and convinced they know better than you do. By noon, they'd successfully herded the cattle back to Henderson's property. Jim Henderson himself rode out to meet them, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Samuel," he greeted, "appreciate you bringing them back. Storm took out 30 feet of fence, been working to repair it all week." "No trouble." Samuel gestured toward Clara. "Jim, this is my wife, Clara. Clara, Jim Henderson, and his wife, Sarah, run the spread east of ours." Jim touched his hat respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am. Sarah mentioned she'd like to call on you sometime, if that's agreeable. Gets lonely out here for the women," she says. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. A neighbor. A potential friend. "I'd like that very much. I'll send her over next week then." Jim turned back to Samuel. "You need any help with that north pasture fence? Heard you've been working on it. Could use an extra hand if you've got time to spare." "I'll send my son over tomorrow. He's 14 but stronger than he looks." Jim paused. "We look out for each other out here. You need anything, you let us know." Riding home, Clara felt the significance of that exchange. In Boston, neighbors had been people to impress, to compete with, to carefully navigate around. Here, they were survival, shared resources, shared labor, shared humanity in a landscape that didn't care about social hierarchies. "That was kind of him," Clara said. "That's how it works out here. You help when help's needed and trust it'll come back around when you're the one who needs it." Samuel glanced at her. "Though I should warn you, Sarah Henderson is the opposite of Mrs. Winters. She'll want to know everything about you, but not to gossip. She's just genuinely interested in people." "That sounds nice." "It is. She's good people. You'll like her." Sarah Henderson arrived the following Tuesday in a wagon driven by her 14-year-old son, a lanky boy named Peter who reminded Clara of a young colt, all legs and awkward energy. Sarah herself was a round woman in her 40s with laugh lines around her eyes and flour dusting her apron. "Clara Carter," she called out, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility. "I've been dying to meet you properly. Jim said you helped round up our cattle, and I thought any woman who can work cattle in this heat deserves a proper welcome." She thrust a cloth-covered basket into Clara's hands. "Fresh bread and preserves." The bread still warm. Clara felt suddenly overwhelmed by this woman's easy kindness. "Thank you. That's very generous." "Generous nothing. It's survival." Sarah linked her arm through Clara's as if they'd been friends for years. "Out here, we women have to stick together. The men have their cattle and their fences, but we have each other. Now, show me this ranch. I want to see what Samuel's done with the place since Margaret left." They spent the afternoon walking the property, Sarah pointing out where things could be improved, offering suggestions born from 20 years of ranch life, asking questions about Clara's background without any judgment in her tone. "Boston. Imagine that," Sarah said, sitting at Clara's kitchen table while they shared coffee and the bread she'd brought. "Must be quite different from Wyoming." "Very different." "You miss it?" Clara considered the question honestly. "I miss some things. Good bookstores, theater, the ocean." She paused. "But I don't miss who I was there." Sarah studied her with sharp, kind eyes. "And who were you there?" "Someone small, even though I wasn't." Clara touched her coffee cup, gathering courage. "I was always too large for Boston standards, too heavy, too visible, too wrong. And here? Here, I'm just the right size for stringing fence wire." Sarah laughed, slapping the table. "Damn right you are. You know what Margaret's problem was? Samuel's first wife? She was tiny, delicate. couldn't lift a feed bucket without struggling, couldn't ride a horse without complaining about saddle sores, couldn't handle a single Wyoming winter without breaking. She leaned forward. Being small doesn't make you strong, and being large doesn't make you weak. Out here, what matters is whether you show up when the work needs doing. Mrs. Winters doesn't seem to share that perspective. Mrs. Winters is a miserable old bat who measures her worth by making other people feel small. Sarah's expression hardened. Don't let her get to you. She tried that nonsense with me when Jim and I first moved here, implied I wasn't refined enough for the territory. I told her refinement doesn't fix a broken wagon axle or birth a breech calf. Clara found herself smiling. What did she say? Nothing useful, but she learned I wouldn't shrink for her convenience. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing Clara's hand. You're stronger than you think. I can see it. Samuel can see it. Eventually, you'll see it too. They became friends after that, real friends, not the careful social alliances Clara had navigated in Boston. Sarah visited weekly, teaching Clara to make preserves, to render lard, to prepare meals that would last through long winters. In return, Clara helped Sarah with difficult reading. Sarah had learned late in life and still struggled with complex texts. Never had much schooling, Sarah admitted one afternoon, frustrated by a passage in a farming almanac. My folks needed me working more than reading. You're doing well, Clara encouraged. This section's just poorly written. Or I'm poorly educated. Education and intelligence aren't the same thing. You know more about surviving out here than any scholar in Boston. Sarah looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. You're good people, Clara Carter. Samuel's lucky to have you. I think I'm the lucky one. Then you're both lucky. That's how the best marriages work. August brought brutal heat and the hardest work Clara had yet experienced. A section of fence collapsed during a violent thunderstorm, and they spent 3 days rebuilding it in temperatures that made the air shimmer and waver. Clara's body adapted, muscles she'd never known she had growing strong and defined beneath softness that remained but no longer felt like failure. One evening, stripped down to her chemise to wash away the day's dust and sweat, Clara caught her reflection in the bedroom mirror. Her body was still large, still soft in places, still nothing like the idealized feminine form promoted by ladies' magazines. But it was also strong, tanned, marked by work and weather and living fully in the world rather than trying to hide from it. She heard Samuel's footsteps in the hallway and turned, suddenly wanting him to see her, really see her, without shame or apology. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes traveling over her body with open appreciation. You're staring, Clara said, but there was no accusation in her voice. I know. Samuel stepped closer. You're beautiful, Clara. I told you that the first day, but it's even more true now. I haven't changed that much. You've changed completely. He touched her shoulder, tracing the new muscle definition there. You stand differently, move differently, look at the world differently. His hand moved to her face, cupping her cheek. You stopped apologizing for taking up space. Clara leaned into his touch. Because space is all there is out here, and you never made me feel like I was taking too much of it. They made love slowly that night, windows open to catch any breath of cool air, their bodies slick with honest sweat. Afterward, Clara lay across Samuel's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. I got a letter from my sister today, she said quietly. Samuel's hand stilled on her back. Yeah? She's expecting a baby, due in December. That's good news. She wants me to come back for the birth, stay for Christmas. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Do you want to go? Did she? Clara traced idle patterns on Samuel's chest, considering. Boston meant her family, her childhood home, all the familiar comforts of city life. But it also meant judgment, whispers, being measured against standards she could never meet. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to see Eleanor. Part of me wants to prove I'm doing well out here. Part of me never wants to go back. What does the biggest part want? Clara thought about it honestly. The biggest part wants to stay here, with you. Build our life without constantly justifying it to people who never understood me anyway. Then stay. Just like that? Just like that. Samuel's arm tightened around her. They're your family, Clara. I won't tell you not to see them, but I also won't tell you that you owe them anything. You get to choose what family means now. Clara lifted her head, meeting his eyes in the moonlight streaming through the window. What if I choose wrong? There's no wrong choice, just different consequences. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. What does your gut tell you? Her gut told her that going back would mean defending herself, explaining herself, proving that her life here was valid despite not meeting Boston's standards. It would mean watching her mother's eyes track every bite of food, every inch of her body, every deviation from acceptable femininity. It would mean shrinking again, even temporarily, and Clara was done shrinking. I'll write Eleanor and decline, she said. Send a gift for the baby. Maybe visit next summer when I'm ready. If you're ready, Samuel corrected gently. If I'm ready. She wrote the letter the next morning, sitting at the kitchen table while Samuel worked on ranch accounts nearby. The words came easier than she expected. Dear Eleanor, congratulations on your pregnancy. I'm thrilled for you and Thomas, and I know you'll be an excellent mother. However, I won't be able to attend the birth or visit for Christmas. Ranch life doesn't pause for holidays, and Samuel and I are preparing for our first winter together. It's important that I'm here, learning what's needed to survive the hard months. Please don't take this as rejection. I'm building a life here that matters to me, a life where I'm valued for my strength rather than judged for my size. I need to protect that, even if it means missing family celebrations. I've enclosed a gift for the baby. Know that you're in my thoughts, even from 2,000 miles away. With love, Clara. She sealed the envelope and set it aside for Samuel to post next time he went to town. Across the table, Samuel looked up from his ledgers. Feel all right about it? I feel honest about it. That's close enough to all right. September brought a crisis that tested everything Clara had learned. Fire. It started on the Henderson Ranch, a lightning strike during a dry spell, igniting grass that hadn't seen rain in 3 weeks. By the time Samuel spotted the smoke, flames were racing across Henderson's south pasture, driven by wind toward their shared property line. We have to help, Clara said, already moving toward the barn. It's dangerous, Samuel warned, but he was saddling horses, gathering equipment, clearly intending to go regardless. Then it's dangerous for both of us. They rode hard toward the Henderson property, joining Jim and Peter and 3 hired hands who were already fighting the flames with wet burlap sacks and desperate determination. Sarah was hauling water from the creek, her face streaked with soot and terror. Clara jumped into the work without hesitation, beating at flames, hauling water, helping Sarah coordinate their limited resources. The heat was overwhelming, the smoke choking, the fear visceral. For 6 hours, they fought. When the wind finally shifted and the flames died down, having consumed 40 acres but sparing the buildings and most of the cattle, they collapsed in exhausted heaps. Jim Henderson sat on the scorched ground, his face in his hands. I can't afford this loss, he said, his voice breaking. Feed for winter was stored in that pasture. Without it, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Without winter feed, his cattle would starve. Without cattle, his ranch would fail. Samuel stood slowly, his body swaying with exhaustion. You can have half our hay. Clara's head snapped up. Half their hay meant risk, meant they'd be cutting it close come winter, meant potential danger to their own survival. But Samuel's eyes were steady, certain. Jim looked up, disbelief warring with desperate hope. Samuel, I can't ask you to... You didn't ask. I'm offering. Samuel held out his hand, helping Jim to his feet. We look out for each other. That's how survival works out here. Clara stood, moving to Samuel's side. Their eyes met, and she saw the question there, silent, asking if she agreed with this dangerous generosity. She nodded. Half our hay, she confirmed. Partners decide together, and I agree. Jim Henderson's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. I'll pay you back, somehow. I swear it. We'll figure it out come spring, Samuel said. Right now, let's just focus on getting through winter. Riding home in the twilight, both of them black with soot and reeking of smoke, Clara felt the weight of what they'd committed to. That was a risk, she said quietly. It was. We could lose cattle if winter's hard. We could. You didn't hesitate. Samuel looked at her, his face serious in the fading light. Neither did you. Clara realized he was right. When the moment had come, she hadn't calculated or questioned. She'd simply agreed because it was the right thing to do. Consequences be damned. We're the same kind of people, Samuel said. I knew it from your first letter. You're the kind who shows up when things are hard, who helps even when it costs something, who understands that some things matter more than safety. What if winter's brutal? What if we gave away too much? Then we'll survive anyway, together. He reached across the space between their horses, finding her hand. That's what partners do. October arrived with the first real cold, and Samuel began preparing the ranch for winter in earnest. They reinforced the barn, stocked firewood, preserved every bit of food they could manage. Clara learned to can vegetables, to smoke meat, to prepare for months when leaving the house might be impossible. Sarah visited less frequently as the weather turned, but when she came, she brought practical gifts, extra blankets, preserved foods, advice gleaned from 20 Wyoming winters. You'll be fine, she assured Clara one afternoon while they worked together canning tomatoes. You're stronger than Margaret ever was, and you've got Samuel. That man would walk through fire for you. He almost did, Clara said, remembering the Henderson fire. Exactly my point. And you stood right there with him. Sarah sealed a jar with practiced efficiency. That's how you know it's real, when you'd face the fire together rather than run apart. A letter arrived in late October, forwarded from Boston. Eleanor had given birth to a daughter named Catherine. The baby was healthy. The delivery had been difficult but successful. Thomas was proud. Their mother was already planning Catherine's future. Clara read the letter twice, feeling complicated emotions she couldn't quite name. She was happy for Eleanor, genuinely happy, but she also felt the distance between them, not just geographical but fundamental. Eleanor's life in Boston, measuring success by social standards and family expectations, felt like something from another world entirely. Clara's life was here, measured in fence posts strung and cattle tended, and winters survived. She wrote a brief congratulatory reply and enclosed money for a silver rattle, a gift expensive enough to prove she was doing well, practical enough to be useful. Then she set Boston firmly out of her mind and focused on preparing for Wyoming winter. November brought the first serious snow. Clara woke to find the world transformed, white and silent and beautiful in its harshness. Samuel was already up, banking the fire, preparing for a day of brutal work keeping animals alive in plummeting temperatures. Stays like this until March, usually, he said, handing her coffee. Sometimes April. We'll be snowed in within a week. Snowed in? Can't get to town. Can't get to neighbors. Roads become impassable. It'll be just us for weeks at a time, maybe months. He studied her face, looking for fear. Still all right with staying? Clara thought about Boston, where winter meant carriages and coal-heated homes and social gatherings that continued regardless of weather, where being trapped inside meant parlor games and calling cards and suffocating social obligations. Here, being trapped meant just her and Samuel, building a life together in honest isolation. I'm all right with staying, she said. The isolation descended gradually, roads becoming difficult, then treacherous, then impossible. By mid-November, they were effectively alone, the ranch an island in an ocean of snow. Clara adapted to the rhythm of winter life. Morning meant breaking ice on water troughs, feeding livestock, hauling wood. Afternoons meant maintaining equipment, mending clothes, reading by firelight. Evenings meant shared meals, quiet conversation, the intimacy of two people learning each other without distraction or escape. Tell me something I don't know about you, Samuel said one night. Both of them huddled close to the fire as wind howled outside. Clara thought about it. I wanted to be a teacher once, before I learned that schools wouldn't hire someone who looked like me. Why not? They said I'd be a distraction, that students would focus on my appearance rather than my lessons. She stared into the flames. It was just another way of saying I was too large to be acceptable. Samuel was quiet for a moment. You'd make a good teacher. How do you know? You taught me to read Shakespeare properly. Before you, I just stumbled through it. You made it make sense. Clara felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. You taught me to ride, to work cattle, To survive out here. Partners, Samuel said simply. Partners, Clara agreed. December brought the hardest weather yet. Temperatures so cold that stepping outside burned Clara's lungs. Wind so fierce it shook the house's foundation. They spent days trapped inside, venturing out only for essential tasks, rationing their supplies carefully. One brutal morning, Samuel discovered 3 cattle had died overnight, frozen despite their best efforts at protection. He came inside silent and grim, and Clara knew without asking that this was winter's first real blow. "We can afford to lose 3, she said quietly. "We planned for losses. Doesn't make it easier?" "No, but we survive anyway." They held each other that night, seeking warmth and comfort, acknowledging the harshness of the life they'd chosen without regret. On Christmas Eve, they were completely snowed in, walls of white blocking the doors, wind screaming like something alive. Samuel cooked a simple dinner while Clara read aloud from Dickens, and they shared a bottle of whiskey Sarah had given them months earlier. "In Boston, my family's probably at some elaborate party right now," Clara said, feeling whiskey warmth spread through her chest. "My mother in silk, my father in his best suit, Eleanor showing off baby Catherine to anyone who'll coo appropriately." "You miss it?" "I miss the idea of it, the fantasy of family warmth." She looked at Samuel across the firelight, but the reality was never warm. It was all performance, all pretense. "And this?" Clara gestured around their small house, wind-battered and isolated, containing nothing but essentials and honesty. "This is real." Samuel raised his glass. "To real, then." "To real," Clara echoed. They made love that night with snow piled against the windows and fire burning low, 2 people choosing each other deliberately, honestly, without illusion or pretense. Afterward, wrapped in quilts and each other's warmth, Samuel spoke into the darkness. "I love you, Clara." The words hung in the air, simple, honest, irrevocable. Clara had spent 30 years believing no one would ever say those words to her, that her body, her size, her fundamental wrongness made love impossible. She'd been catastrophically, beautifully wrong. "I love you too," she whispered back, and meant it completely. They fell asleep like that, wind howling outside, warmth shared between them, 2 people surviving winter together through nothing but stubborn determination and honest love. When Clara woke on Christmas morning, the storm had broken. Sunlight streamed through windows, turning snow into diamonds, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear cattle lowing, alive, surviving, enduring, just like her, just like Samuel, just like their partnership, built on honesty in a landscape that demanded nothing less. January came with deceptive calm, clear skies and temperatures that, while still brutal, felt almost merciful compared to December's fury. Clara had learned to read the weather now, to see warning signs in cloud formations and wind patterns that Samuel pointed out during their daily checks on the livestock. "That sky worries me," he said one morning, standing on the porch and studying the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Too still, like the land's holding its breath." Clara followed his gaze to where pale gray clouds gathered in the distance, barely visible against the snow-covered mountains. "Another storm?" "Feels like it. Big one, maybe." Samuel turned to her, his expression serious. "We should bring everything we might need closer to the house. Extra wood, extra feed for the animals we can shelter in the barn. If this hits like I think it will, we might not be able to leave the house for days." They spent the morning preparing, hauling supplies through knee-deep snow, their breath clouding in air so cold it felt sharp in Clara's lungs. Her body had adapted to this life. Muscles that had once ached now worked efficiently, endurance built through months of relentless physical demands. By afternoon, the storm hit. It came fast and vicious, wind driving snow horizontally, visibility dropping to nothing within minutes. Samuel barely made it back from the barn, his coat white with snow, ice forming in his beard. "That's as bad as I've seen," he said, stripping off frozen layers by the fire. "We're locked in now. Could be 3 days. Could be a week." Clara handed him hot coffee, watching his hands shake slightly as he wrapped them around the mug. Not from fear, from cold that had seeped bone deep in the minutes he'd been outside. "The cattle?" she asked. "Sheltered as best they can be. We'll lose some. Can't help that." His voice was flat, accepting. But we did what we could. They settled into the forced intimacy of confinement, days bleeding into each other, marked only by the routine of keeping the fire burning and melting snow for water. Samuel taught Clara to play chess using a set carved from wood, pieces worn smooth by his first wife's hands years ago. Margaret hated being trapped inside, Samuel said one evening, moving his bishop with careful precision. She'd pace like a caged animal, get angry at me for things that weren't my fault, blame me for bringing her somewhere so isolated. Did you blame yourself? Samuel considered the question while Clara studied the board, looking for her next move. At first, thought maybe I should have warned her better, prepared her more. But the truth is, I told her exactly what winter would be like. She just didn't believe it until she lived it. Clara moved her knight, threatening his queen. Some things you can't understand until you experience them. True enough, Samuel countered her move smoothly. But the difference between you and Margaret isn't that you were better prepared. It's that you're willing to endure things she wasn't. Maybe she just wanted different things. She wanted easy, beautiful, comfortable. Samuel met Clara's eyes across the chessboard. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. They just don't exist out here. Not in winter. Not when survival's the daily work. Clara captured his queen, feeling a small thrill of victory. I never expected easy. I know. That's why this works. The storm raged for 6 days. On the 7th morning, Clara woke to silence so complete it felt oppressive. She rose carefully, trying not to disturb Samuel, and moved to the window. The world outside was transformed. Snow piled so high it reached the windowsills, everything buried under white that sparkled in weak morning sun. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Samuel joined her at the window, his hand finding hers automatically. We'll need to dig out, check on the animals, assess damage. It took 3 hours to clear enough snow to open the door. When they finally reached the barn, Clara's heart sank at what they found. 12 cattle dead, frozen despite the shelter, despite their preparations, despite everything they'd done right. Samuel stood silent among the frozen bodies, his face carved from stone. 12 cattle meant significant loss, money, breeding stock, future security. Clara touched his arm gently. We planned for this. We knew winter would take some. Knowing doesn't make it easier. His voice was rough. Every one of these represents work, time, investment. And we still have over 200 alive. We still have the ranch. We still have each other. Clara turned him to face her, forcing him to meet her eyes. We survived this. Together. Samuel pulled her close, his embrace fierce. I chose well, he said into her hair. Choosing you. We chose each other, Clara corrected. Partners, remember? They spent the next week digging out, checking on neighbors when roads became passable, accounting for losses and celebrating survivals. The Hendersons had fared better, only 8 cattle lost, partly because of the hay Samuel had given them, which had allowed better feeding through the worst of the storm. I owe you, Jim said when they finally made contact, his voice thick with emotion. That hay saved my herd, saved my ranch. We look out for each other, Samuel replied, the same words he'd used months ago. That debt's already paid in friendship. But Jim shook his head. Come spring, I'm sending Peter over to help with whatever work you need. No charge. Consider it payment. Sarah visited in early February, the first time in over a month that travel had been possible. She embraced Clara fiercely, studying her face with concerned eyes. You made it through, Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Your first Wyoming winter, the worst test. Barely, Clara admitted. There were moments I thought we might not. But you did. And now you know you can. Sarah settled at the kitchen table, accepting coffee gratefully. The second winter's easier, not because the weather's better, it usually isn't, but because you know what to expect, know you can endure it. They talked for hours, Sarah filling Clara in on town gossip and neighbor news. Mrs. Winters had been spreading rumors about that mail-order bride who probably wouldn't last the winter, apparently taking bets with anyone who'd listen. She's going to be disappointed, Sarah said with grim satisfaction. You not only lasted, you thrived. I can see it in you, Clara. You're different than when you arrived. Clara knew it was true. She could feel the difference in how she moved through the world. Shoulders back, head high, no apology in her posture. Her body was still large, still soft in places, but it was also strong, capable, exactly right for the life she'd built. I am different, Clara agreed. I stopped waiting for permission to exist. Sarah raised her coffee cup in salute. To existing without permission. To existing without permission, Clara echoed. March brought thaw and the messy, muddy transition between winter's harshness and spring's promise. The ranch yard became a swamp, cattle grew restless after months of confinement, and Clara discovered something that changed everything. She was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks but hadn't been certain. Her monthly courses had always been irregular, and the nausea could have been attributed to winter diet or cabin fever. But by mid-March, there was no denying the signs her body was showing. She told Samuel one evening after supper, the words simple and direct. I'm carrying a child. Samuel's hand stilled on the ledger he'd been updating. He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. You're certain? As certain as I can be without a doctor. Clara twisted her hands together, suddenly nervous. I know we never discussed children. I don't know if you want... Samuel crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with such force it drove the breath from her lungs. A child, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Our child. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. You're happy about it? Happy? Samuel pulled back, cupping her face in his weathered hands. Clara, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely unprepared, but yes, I'm happy. I'm scared, Clara admitted. My body's already wrong by the world's standards. What if pregnancy makes it worse? What if I can't do the work anymore? What if... Your body's not wrong. Samuel's voice was fierce. Your body's strong, capable. It survived a Wyoming winter. It works this ranch beside me every day. And now it's creating life. He pressed his hand gently to her still flat stomach. There's nothing wrong about any of that. Clara leaned into him, letting his certainty steady her fear. We'll need to prepare. A cradle, supplies, a doctor for the birth. We'll figure it out, together. Samuel kissed her forehead. Same as everything else. April brought the first real warmth and the arrival of a letter from Boston that Clara almost didn't open. The handwriting was her mother's, precise, controlled, revealing nothing through its perfection. Samuel watched her stare at the envelope, his expression concerned. You don't have to read it. I know. But Clara broke the seal anyway, unfolding thick paper that smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. The letter was brief. Clara, Eleanor informs me that you've declined to visit, even for your niece's christening. Your father and I are disappointed, but not surprised. You've always been selfish, choosing your own comfort over family obligations. I hope you're satisfied with your choice, marrying some frontier rancher, living in primitive conditions, abandoning your family for a life of manual labor. Eleanor says you seem happy in your letters, but I suspect you're simply too proud to admit your mistake. When you tire of this adventure and wish to return to civilized society, you may find the door less welcoming than when you left it. Your mother, Clara, read it twice, feeling old wounds try to reopen. Familiar shame, familiar inadequacy, familiar sense of never being enough for the woman who bore her. Then she walked to the fireplace and dropped the letter into the flames. Clara? Samuel asked quietly. She wanted me to feel small again, Clara said, watching paper curl and blacken. To remember that I'm disappointing. Wrong. A failure by her measurements. And I'm done being measured by people who don't know how to see me. Clara turned to face her husband, this man who had looked at her body, this body her mother found shameful, and called her beautiful. I'm carrying your child, Samuel. We're building a ranch, a life, a partnership that works. That's real. That matters. What she thinks doesn't. Samuel pulled her close, and Clara felt something final settle in her chest. Not anger at her mother, not bitterness or resentment, just acceptance that some people would never understand the life she'd chosen, and that was acceptable. She didn't need their understanding. She had her own. May brought Sarah Henderson and the doctor from town, a gruff man named Dr. Morrison who'd been delivering babies in Wyoming territory for 30 years. He examined Clara with impersonal efficiency, asked pointed questions about her health and history, and finally nodded with something like approval. "You're strong," he said bluntly. "Good muscle tone, good color, no obvious concerns. The baby seems to be developing properly." He paused, studying her with shrewd eyes. "You're carrying more weight than medical journals recommend, but out here, that's an advantage. You'll need reserves for labor and nursing. Winter pregnancy takes a toll." Clara felt something unknot in her chest. "So there's nothing wrong?" "Wrong." Dr. Morrison packed his instruments with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Carter, I've delivered babies from women half your size who nearly died in childbirth, and women twice your size who birthed their children without complication. Size isn't the determining factor. Health is. And you're healthy." After he left, Sarah stayed behind, helping Clara begin preparing for the baby's arrival. "You'll want cloth for diapers," Sarah said, mentally cataloging necessities. "A good cradle, Jim can build one. Warm blankets, basic medicines in case of fever." She paused, her expression softening. "And you'll want someone with experience present for the birth. I've helped deliver 17 babies, including 3 of my own. I'll be here when your time comes." "You don't have to." "I want to." Sarah gripped Clara's hand firmly. "You're my friend, Clara, and out here, we take care of our own." Summer came in full force, bringing heat and work that seemed endless. Clara's body changed with pregnancy. Belly swelling, breasts growing heavy, movement becoming more deliberate. But she continued working alongside Samuel, adjusting tasks as needed, but refusing to be treated as fragile. "You should rest more," Samuel said one afternoon, watching her repair fence wire with concentration that had become second nature. "I've rested. Now I'm working." "Clara, I'm pregnant, not broken." She twisted wire with practiced efficiency. "My body knows what it's doing. I'll slow down when I need to, but I'm not spending the next 4 months sitting idle while you do everything." Samuel recognized the steel in her voice, the same steel that had brought her across a continent, that had survived a brutal winter, that had chosen existence over apology. "All right," he said, "but you tell me if anything feels wrong." "I will." July brought a crisis that tested Clara's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. A rider came in the afternoon, young Peter Henderson, his horse lathered from hard riding, his face pale with fear. "It's Ma," he said, gasping for breath. "Something's wrong. Pa says the baby's coming early and something's not right. Dr. Morrison's out at the Carlson Ranch delivering twins. We need help." Clara's hands went instinctively to her own swollen belly. Sarah was in labor, early labor, with complications and no doctor available. "I'll go," she said immediately. Samuel turned to her, concern etched in every line of his face. "Clara, you're 6 months pregnant yourself. This could be—" "Sarah was there for me. I'll be there for her." Clara was already moving toward the house, gathering supplies with swift efficiency. "Women have been helping women through childbirth since the beginning of time. We don't always get to choose perfect circumstances." She rode to the Henderson Ranch with Samuel, Peter leading the way at a pace that made Clara's teeth rattle. Every jolt sent worry through her. Worry for her own baby, worry for Sarah, worry about what she'd find when they arrived. Jim Henderson met them at the door, his face gray with terror. "She's been laboring since dawn. Something's wrong. The baby won't come." Clara found Sarah in bed, her face slick with sweat, her body racked with contractions that seemed to accomplish nothing. She gripped Clara's hand with desperate strength. "It's too early," Sarah gasped. "The baby's not positioned right. I can feel it. Clara, I'm scared." Clara had no medical training, no experience with complicated births, nothing but instinct and the fierce determination to save her friend. She examined Sarah as gently as possible, feeling what Sarah meant. The baby was breech, positioned wrong, unable to descend properly. "We need to turn the baby," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've seen it done with cattle. The principle should be similar." "Cattle?" Jim's voice cracked with panic. "It's this or wait for Dr. Morrison, who might not arrive in time." Clara looked at Sarah directly. "Do you trust me?" Sarah's eyes were clouded with pain, but her voice was clear. "I trust you." What followed was the most terrifying hour of Clara's life. Working by instinct and desperate prayer, she carefully, incrementally, helped manipulate the baby into proper position. Sarah screamed. Clara wept. Jim paced outside like a caged animal, But slowly, impossibly, the baby turned. And then, with one final push, Sarah's daughter entered the world, tiny, early, but breathing. Clara wrapped the infant in clean cloth, checking for obvious problems, her hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. The baby was small but seemed healthy, her cries strong and indignant. She placed the infant in Sarah's arms, watching her friend's face transform with love and exhaustion. "You saved us," Sarah whispered. "Both of us." "You would have done the same for me." "I will do the same for you," Sarah corrected. "When your time comes, I'll be there." Riding home in the twilight, Clara felt her own baby moving inside her, strong kicks that seemed almost reassuring, as if to say, "I'm still here. We're fine." Samuel rode close beside her, his concern palpable. That was incredibly dangerous. "It was necessary. You could have hurt yourself. The baby is fine." Clara touched her belly, feeling movement beneath her palm. "And Sarah's alive because we were there. That matters more than fear." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're the bravest person I've ever known." "I'm just a woman who showed up when needed." "Exactly." August brought Clara's final weeks of pregnancy, her body huge and unwieldy, movement difficult, work necessarily limited. She spent more time inside preparing the cradle Jim had built, sewing tiny clothes, reading every book on childbirth she could find. Samuel hovered, increasingly anxious as her due date approached. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked one night, watching her struggle to find a comfortable position in bed. "Then we handle it, same as everything else." Clara took his hand, pressing it to her belly where their child rolled and kicked. "Feel that? That's strength. That's life. That's what my body was made to do." Samuel's voice caught. "I can't lose you, Clara. I survived alone before, but I can't go back to that. Not now." Clara pulled him close, holding him while he shook with fear he'd been keeping buried for months. "You won't lose me," she promised. "I'm too stubborn to die in childbirth. I've got too much left to do." "Like what?" "Like raising this child with you, like proving Mrs. Winters wrong, like living a full, real, unapologetic life until I'm old and gray and still taking up all the space I want." Samuel laughed despite his fear, and Clara felt the tension ease slightly between them. They would face childbirth the same way they'd faced everything else. Together, honestly, with courage born from partnership rather than individual strength. And whatever came, they would endure it. Because that's what they did. That's who they were. Partners in all weather, just as Reverend Thomas had blessed them to be. Labor began on a clear September morning, 3 days before Clara's calculated due date. She woke to pain that was different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. Sharper, more insistent, radiating from her belly through her entire body like waves. Samuel was already awake, watching her with eyes that hadn't seen much sleep. "It's time?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "It's time." He moved with swift efficiency, sending Peter Henderson, who'd been staying nearby for exactly this purpose, to fetch Sarah and Dr. Morrison. Then he helped Clara from bed, supporting her weight as another contraction gripped her body. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Just breathe through it." Clara wanted to snap at him that breathing was obvious, unnecessary advice, but the contraction passed and she found herself grateful for his steady presence. Sarah arrived within the hour, Dr. Morrison an hour after that. They transformed the bedroom into a birthing room with practiced efficiency. Clean linens, hot water, instruments Clara tried not to look at too closely. "Everything looks normal," Dr. Morrison said after examining her. "Baby's positioned well. Your body knows what to do. This is just going to take time." Time turned out to be an understatement. Hours passed. Morning became afternoon, became evening. Contractions came in relentless waves, each one harder than the last. Clara's body working with single-minded determination to bring new life into the world. Samuel stayed close, letting her grip his hand until she worried she might break bones, murmuring encouragement that sometimes helped and sometimes just irritated her. "You're doing well," he said for the 100th time. "I'm dying," Clara gasped. "This is dying." "You're not dying. You're bringing our child into the world." "Same thing." Sarah wiped Clara's forehead with a cool cloth, her expression both sympathetic and amused. Every woman thinks she's dying during labor. You're not special in that regard. That's supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be honest. Another contraction hit, and Clara stopped caring about comfort or honesty or anything except the overwhelming physical reality of her body doing something she couldn't control, couldn't stop, could only endure. Night fell. Dr. Morrison checked her progress with impersonal efficiency. You're close now. Next hour, maybe 2. When I tell you to push, you push with everything you have. Clara wanted to argue that she'd been pushing, that her body had been doing nothing but pushing for hours, but another contraction stole her breath and her words. Samuel's hand was there, solid and real, anchoring her to something beyond pain. I can't, she whispered when the contraction passed. Samuel, I can't do this. You can. You are doing it. He pressed his lips to her forehead. You're the strongest person I know, Clara. You crossed a continent. You survived winter. You saved Sarah's life. You can do this. That was different. This is the same. Just another storm to weather, and you don't quit in storms. The urge to push became overwhelming, instinctive, impossible to resist. Dr. Morrison positioned himself with professional readiness. Now, Mrs. Carter, push now. Clara pushed and pushed and pushed until she thought her body might tear apart, until sweat soaked through the sheets, until Sarah's encouraging words and Samuel's steady presence became distant sounds beneath the roaring in her ears. Then, impossibly, release. A moment of profound silence, followed by a cry, strong, indignant, absolutely alive. It's a girl, Dr. Morrison announced, lifting a tiny, squalling infant. Healthy lungs, good color, she's perfect. Sarah cleaned the baby with gentle efficiency, while Clara collapsed back against pillows, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief and something too big to name. Then Sarah placed the infant in Clara's arms. She was tiny, red-faced and furious, fists waving, eyes squinting against lamplight, dark hair plastered to her skull. Samuel's nose, Clara's chin, something entirely new and miraculous. Hello, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hello, little one. Samuel knelt beside the bed, his weathered hand touching their daughter's head with infinite gentleness. His eyes were wet, his expression raw with emotion he didn't try to hide. She's beautiful, he said, like her mother. Clara looked at this man who had called her beautiful when the world had called her wrong, who had seen strength where others saw failure, who had chosen partnership over possession. What should we name her? She asked. Samuel studied their daughter's face, considering. Catherine, maybe? After Eleanor's daughter. A bridge between your past and our future. Clara shook her head slowly. No, Eleanor has her Catherine. This is our daughter. She needs her own name. She looked down at the infant in her arms, this tiny person who had fought her way into the world with stubborn determination. Hannah? Hannah Carter. Hannah, Samuel repeated, testing the name. Why Hannah? It means grace. And this, Clara gestured at their daughter, at this life they'd built, at everything that had brought them to this moment. This is grace, undeserved, unexpected, perfect. Hannah Carter, Samuel said and smiled. I like it. Dr. Morrison finished his work with business-like efficiency, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. Sarah stayed through the night, helping with the first attempts at nursing, teaching Clara the 1,000 small skills of caring for an infant. You're a natural, Sarah said, watching Clara cradle Hannah with instinctive protectiveness, though every new mother feels like she's fumbling in the dark at first. I'm terrified I'll break her. You won't. Babies are tougher than they look. Sarah adjusted Hannah's blanket with practiced hands. And you're stronger than you think. You always have been. Dawn broke clear and golden, painting the bedroom in shades of amber and hope. Samuel had dozed off in the chair beside the bed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Hannah slept against Clara's chest, her breathing soft and steady. Clara studied her daughter's face in the early light, memorizing every detail. This child would grow up in Wyoming, would learn to ride before she could write, would measure her worth in work done and kindness shown rather than inches around her waist. She would never know the shame Clara had carried for 3 decades. Clara would make certain of that. Over the following weeks, the ranch adjusted to include Hannah. Samuel built a cradle that rocked beside their bed, carved toys from scraps of wood during evening hours, approached fatherhood with the same steady determination he brought to everything else. Clara's body changed again, breasts heavy with milk, belly soft but strong, movements dictated by an infant's needs rather than ranch work schedules. She chafed at the temporary limitations, eager to return to full partnership with Samuel. "Give yourself time," Sarah advised during one of her visits, watching Clara pace the kitchen while Hannah napped. "You just grew and birthed a human. Your body needs recovery." "I feel useless." "You're feeding our daughter every 3 hours," Samuel said from where he was washing dishes. "Keeping her alive. That's not useless." "You know what I mean." Samuel dried his hands and turned to face her. "I do. And in another few weeks you'll be back to full work. But right now, this is the work, and it's important." Clara knew he was right, but the forced stillness felt wrong after months of constant physical labor. She was used to measuring her worth in fence posts strung and cattle tended, not in hours spent nursing and rocking and changing diapers. But slowly she began to understand that this was partnership too, Samuel taking on extra ranch work while she focused on Hannah, both of them contributing differently but equally to their family's survival. October brought a letter from Boston that Clara almost ignored, but the handwriting was Eleanor's, not their mother's, and curiosity won out over caution. She opened it while Hannah slept and Samuel worked on ranch accounts. "Dear Clara, I hope this letter finds you well. Mother refuses to speak of you, but Father occasionally shares bits of news, and I've pieced together that you're thriving in Wyoming. I'm writing because I need to apologize. For years I watched Mother criticize you, judge you, try to reshape you into something acceptable. And I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that you were strong enough to handle it. But that was cowardice. I should have defended you, should have told Mother she was wrong, should have been a better sister. I've been thinking about this more since Catherine was born. Looking at my daughter, I can't imagine measuring her worth by her appearance. Can't imagine making her feel like her body is something to apologize for. Yet I watched Mother do exactly that to you, and I stayed silent. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I should have seen then. You were never the problem. You were just the one brave enough to refuse to be broken by other people's standards. I hope you're happy in Wyoming. I hope your rancher sees what I failed to see, that you're extraordinary exactly as you are." With love and regret, Eleanor Clara read the letter twice, feeling complicated emotions she couldn't quite name. Anger at years of silence, sadness at what they'd lost. Strange, tentative hope at this olive branch extended across 2,000 miles. "Everything all right?" Samuel asked, looking up from his ledgers. Clara handed him the letter. He read it carefully, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to tear it up and forget Boston exists. Part of me wants—" She paused, searching for words. "Part of me wants Eleanor to know I'm not angry, that I'm happy, that leaving was the best thing I ever did." "Then tell her that." Clara found paper and pen and wrote while Hannah slept. "Eleanor, thank you for your honesty. You're right. You should have spoken up. But I understand why you didn't. Mother's expectations were crushing for both of us, just in different ways. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Because everything that happened in Boston, every criticism, every humiliation, every moment of being measured and found wanting, led me here. To Samuel, to our ranch, to our daughter Hannah, who will never know what it feels like to apologize for existing. You asked if I'm happy. I am. Not in the easy way people imagine happiness. There's no luxury here, no comfort, no escape from hard work and harsh weather. But there's honesty, partnership, a life built on what I can do rather than how I look doing it. I hope you're happy too, and I hope Catherine grows up knowing she's enough exactly as she is. Your sister, Clara. She sealed the letter and set it aside for Samuel to post next time he went to town. Then she picked up Hannah, who was stirring from her nap, and carried her daughter to the window. "See that?" Clara said, pointing at the vast Wyoming landscape stretching to the mountains. "That's your world. No one here will tell you to be smaller, quieter, less. You get to take up all the space you want." Hannah made a small noise that might have been agreement or just infant sounds, but Clara chose to believe it was agreement. November brought the first serious snow and a visitor Clara hadn't expected, Jim Henderson, looking uncomfortable and determined. "Got something to say," he announced, standing in their kitchen with his hat in his hands. "Been putting it off, but Sarah says I'm being foolish, so here it is." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, setting it on the table with a heavy thunk. "That's payment for the hay you gave us last year, plus interest. Took me a year to get it together, but a debt's a debt." Samuel pushed the pouch back toward Jim. "We told you." "I know what you told me. But a man pays his debts." Jim's voice was firm. "You saved my ranch, Samuel. You and Clara both. This doesn't come close to settling what I owe, but it's a start." Samuel looked at Clara, silently asking her opinion. She thought about their diminished savings after a hard year, about the coming winter, about Hannah's future needs. "We accept," she said, with gratitude. Jim's shoulders relaxed. "Good. And there's more. Peter's been working for you most of the summer, but I'm making it official. He's yours for spring planting and fall harvest, no charge, for the next 5 years. That's the interest on the debt." "Jim, that's too much. It's exactly right." Jim met Samuel's eyes steadily. "You gave when we needed it most. Now we give back. That's how community works." After Jim left, Samuel counted the money with something like wonder. "This changes things. We can buy breeding stock for spring, maybe expand the herd. Or save it for hard times," Clara suggested, bouncing Hannah gently. "We've learned what winter can do." "True." Samuel pulled Clara close, careful of the baby between them. "Either way, we're not alone out here. That matters." "It does," Clara agreed. December brought Christmas and another letter from Boston, this one from Clara's father, written in his careful, measured script. "My dear Clara, your mother refuses to acknowledge this correspondence, but I wanted you to know that Eleanor shared your letter with me. I was moved by your words, particularly your description of happiness built on honesty rather than ease. I owe you an apology I never gave you while you lived under my roof. I watched your mother judge you, criticize you, try to reshape you into something more acceptable. And I did nothing. I told myself I was keeping peace, but I was really just taking the coward's way out. You deserved a father who defended you, who told you that your worth had nothing to do with your appearance, who saw your intelligence, your kindness, your quiet strength. I failed you in that regard. I'm proud of the life you've built in Wyoming, proud of your courage in leaving, proud of the woman you've become, though truthfully, you were always that woman. You just needed space to show it. I've enclosed a bank draft for your daughter. Consider it a grandfather's gift, given with love and regret for time wasted on things that never mattered. Your father." The bank draft was substantial, enough to make Clara's hand shake as she held it. "He's trying to make amends," Samuel said, reading the letter over her shoulder. "Money can't fix years of silence." "No, but it's something, an acknowledgement at least that he was wrong." Clara looked at Hannah, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "I won't do that to her. I won't stand by while someone makes her feel wrong. I won't choose peace over defending my daughter." "I know you won't." Samuel kissed her temple. "You're not your mother. You're not your father. You're Clara Carter, and you don't make those kinds of mistakes." They spent Christmas quietly, just the three of them and Sarah's family, sharing a meal in warmth while snow piled high outside. Peter played with Hannah with teenage awkwardness. Sarah told stories from 20 Wyoming winters, and Jim presented Samuel with a hand-forged branding iron bearing the Carter Ranch mark. "Official now," Jim said. "You're established, part of the community." Clara felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. This was home. These people were family, not by blood, but by choice and shared survival. Winter deepened, but this year Clara faced it with confidence born from experience. She knew what to expect now, knew how to prepare, knew that spring would come eventually, no matter how long the darkness lasted. Hannah grew, changing daily in small, miraculous ways. Clara's body adapted to motherhood. Breasts that fed, arms that rocked, a deep well of patience she'd never known she possessed. By February, she was back to light ranch work, bundling Hannah in warm layers and carrying her in a sling while she fed chickens and hauled water. Samuel worried, but Clara insisted. She needs to see how we live, needs to grow up understanding that work is just part of life, not something to fear or avoid. She's 4 months old, and already learning. Clara adjusted Hannah's hat, protecting tiny ears from bitter wind. Learning that her mother doesn't hide, doesn't apologize, doesn't shrink. March brought thaw and a visitor Clara truly hadn't expected, Mrs. Winters, arriving in a wagon driven by her put-upon husband. Clara met her on the porch, Hannah on her hip, wearing work clothes and no apology. "Mrs. Winters, this is unexpected." The older woman looked uncomfortable, her usual sharp confidence blunted by something Clara couldn't identify. "Mrs. Carter, I came to—" She paused, clearly struggling. "To apologize." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry?" "For how I treated you when you first arrived. The things I said, the assumptions I made." Mrs. Winters twisted her gloves between her hands. "I was cruel, unnecessary, wrong. What changed your mind?" "Sarah Henderson. She came to town last month and told me exactly what she thought of my behavior, in front of half the store." Mrs. Winters' lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "She's not subtle, that woman. No, she's not. She told me you saved her life during a difficult birth, that you worked this ranch as hard as any man, that you survived your first Wyoming winter better than most people born here." Mrs. Winters met Clara's eyes directly. "And she told me I was a judgmental old fool who wouldn't recognize strength if it hit me in the face." Clara felt a laugh bubble up despite herself. "That sounds like Sarah." She was right, about all of it. Mrs. Winters looked at Hannah, her expression softening. "You have a beautiful daughter." "Thank you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong about you. Completely, thoroughly wrong." Clara studied this woman who had judged her so harshly, who had taken bets on her failure, who represented everything Clara had fled from in Boston, and found she wasn't angry. Mrs. Winters was just another person caught in the trap of measuring worth by appearance, of valuing ornamental over functional, of missing what mattered because she was looking at the wrong things. "I appreciate your apology," Clara said, "and I accept it." Mrs. Winters looked genuinely surprised. "Just like that?" "Just like that. Life's too short to carry grudges, and I've got better things to do with my energy." After Mrs. Winters left, Samuel emerged from the barn where he'd been diplomatically absent. That was unexpected. That was Sarah being Sarah. Clara shifted Hannah to her other hip. Apparently she gave Mrs. Winters a piece of her mind. "Remind me never to get on Sarah's bad side." "Too late. She loves you too much. We're stuck with her fierce loyalty forever." Samuel grinned. "There are worse fates." April brought Clara's second letter from Eleanor, filled with stories of Catherine's first words and first steps, news of Boston society, and a question that surprised Clara. "Thomas has been offered a position in Denver, not Wyoming exactly, but closer. We're considering accepting it. The thought of being nearer to you, of our daughters growing up as cousins rather than strangers, appeals to me more than I expected. Would we be welcome to visit if we came west?" Clara showed the letter to Samuel that evening while Hannah played with wooden blocks on the floor. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think it's your decision. Your family, your choice." Clara watched Hannah stack blocks with intense concentration, this child who would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, enough exactly as she was. "I think I'd like Hannah to know her cousin," Clara said slowly. "And maybe it's time to build something new with Eleanor, not what we had before. That's gone. But something honest, real. Then write back and tell her yes." Clara did, and felt something shift in her chest. Not closure exactly, just acceptance that people could change, that relationships could be rebuilt on new foundations, that the past didn't have to dictate the future. Summer came with all its demands: planting, cattle work, endless labor under relentless sun. Hannah grew into a chubby, adventurous baby who laughed at the chickens and grabbed at anything within reach. Clara worked beside Samuel with Hannah strapped to her back and found that motherhood and ranch work fit together better than she'd feared. In July, Eleanor and Thomas arrived for a week-long visit. The reunion was awkward at first. too many years of hurt, too much left unsaid. But watching their daughters play together, watching Eleanor navigate ranch life with city-bred awkwardness but genuine effort, something began to heal. One evening, sitting on the porch while the men talked cattle and the babies slept, Eleanor spoke quietly. "You were right to leave." Clara looked at her sister, surprised. "What?" "Boston, Mother's house, all of it. You were right to leave." Eleanor stared out at the Wyoming landscape, vast and honest under starlight. "I thought you were running away. But you were running toward something, toward this, toward a life that actually fit you. I didn't know if it would work. But you tried anyway. That's the brave part." Eleanor turned to face her. "I'm trying too. Thomas took the Denver position. We're moving west. Not as far as you, but closer. And I'm going to make sure Catherine knows her Aunt Clara, knows that women can be strong and large and loud and still be loved." "You were always loved, Eleanor. You were just loved conditionally. And you refused to accept conditions." Eleanor reached for Clara's hand. "Thank you for that. For showing me there's another way." After they left, Clara felt lighter somehow. Not forgiven. She'd never really needed forgiveness, but seen, acknowledged. Her choice validated by the very people who'd once questioned it. September brought Hannah's first birthday and a gathering of everyone who'd become family. The Hendersons, Dr. Morrison, even Mrs. Winters bearing an elaborately knitted blanket as a gift. They celebrated with cake Sarah had baked and stories told around the dinner table, and Clara looked at this community they'd built through honesty and hard work and mutual support. This was what she'd been searching for when she boarded that train in Boston. Not rescue, not transformation, just a place where she could exist without apology. October brought another crisis. Jim Henderson thrown from a horse, leg badly broken, unable to work during the critical fall harvest. Without discussion, Samuel and Clara reorganized their schedule. Samuel worked Henderson's fields in the mornings, their own in the afternoons. Clara managed both households' domestic needs, cooking meals for both families, caring for Hannah, and helping Sarah with her younger children. It was exhausting, brutal work, but it was also simple reciprocity. Help given because help had been received, community sustained through shared burden. "We couldn't survive without you," Sarah said one evening, her voice thick with gratitude. "You did the same for us," Clara replied. "That's how this works." November brought snow and the quiet satisfaction of a successful harvest, stored provisions, cattle healthy and strong heading into winter. Clara's second Wyoming winter felt different from her first. Not easier. Winter was never easy, but familiar, expected. Something she knew she could endure because she'd already done it. One evening, after Hannah was asleep and the fire burned low, Samuel pulled Clara close on the sofa. "You know what I realized today?" he said. "What?" "It's been 2 years since you stepped off that train. 2 years since I first saw you and thought my luck had finally changed." Clara thought about that day, her terror, her hope, her desperate determination to find a place where her body didn't have to be an apology. "Did your luck change?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Completely. Absolutely." Samuel kissed her forehead. "I got a partner who's stronger than I ever deserved, a daughter who's going to be even stronger, a life that's real instead of just survival." Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid reality of their partnership. "I got the same. A man who saw me instead of just looking at me. A home where I can be large and loud and still be loved. A daughter who'll never know what it feels like to be wrong." They sat in comfortable silence, and Clara realized something profound. Her body, this body she'd spent 30 years hating, hiding, trying to reshape into something acceptable, had done extraordinary things. It had carried her across a continent. It had learned to work cattle and string fence wire. It had survived brutal winters and backbreaking labor. It had grown and birthed a daughter. It had created this life, this partnership, this family. It had never been too much. It had simply been waiting to be seen. Years passed. Hannah grew into a sturdy child with Samuel's steady eyes and Clara's stubborn spirit. More children followed. 2 sons who learned early that their mother was as strong as their father, that partnership meant equal contribution, that worth had nothing to do with appearance. The ranch prospered. Samuel and Clara built it together, decision by decision, season by season, crisis weathered and triumph shared. Eleanor visited regularly from Denver, and slowly, carefully, the sisters rebuilt their relationship on new foundations. Their mother never acknowledged Clara's success, but their father wrote occasionally, his letters growing warmer over time. Clara found she didn't need her mother's approval anymore. Didn't need validation from people who measured worth in inches and pounds, rather than character and capability. She had everything that mattered right here. On a clear autumn day when Hannah was 18 and preparing to leave for teachers' college in Denver, Clara stood with her daughter on the porch, watching the sun set over the Wyoming landscape that had become home. "You're not scared?" Clara asked. "About leaving?" "Terrified," Hannah admitted. "But you taught me that being scared doesn't mean you don't go. It just means you go anyway." Clara pulled her daughter close. "You never have to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Remember that. Take up all the space you want. Be large. Be loud. Be yourself without apology." "I will." Hannah looked at her mother with eyes that had only ever known acceptance. "Because you showed me how." That evening, after Hannah left for Denver, Clara and Samuel sat on the porch as they had countless times before. Samuel's hair was more gray now, his hands more weathered. Clara's body showed the marks of age and hard work, lines around her eyes, strength in her shoulders, softness that remained but no longer felt like failure. "You're beautiful," Samuel said, the same words he'd spoken the day she arrived. This time, Clara didn't argue. She knew it was true. Not because her body had changed to meet the world's standards, but because she'd changed how she measured beauty. Beauty wasn't about size or shape or meeting external expectations. Beauty was about bravery, about honesty, about building a life that mattered and filling it with love and work and purpose. Beauty was about refusing to apologize for existing. She had once believed she was too much, too large, too visible, too wrong to be loved. Instead, she had built a life too full to regret, a life of partnership and purpose, a life of children raised to know their worth, a life of community sustained through mutual support, a life that mattered not because it was easy or comfortable or conventionally beautiful, but because it was real. And in that life, hard and honest and unapologetically hers, Clara had discovered the truth she'd crossed a continent to find. She had never been too much. She had simply been waiting for a place that had room for all of her, for eyes that could see her properly, for a life that deserved her strength. She'd found it here, in Wyoming's honest landscape. She'd found it in Samuel's steady partnership. She'd found it in the children who would carry forward the lessons she'd learned so painfully. She'd found it in herself. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the life Clara Carter had chosen, large and loud and completely, unapologetically her own.